Hello everyone, and welcome to Lesson 2 of Mr. Markoteach Long Distance Learning. I hope you enjoyed the first video, and I hope you enjoy this video. I can tell that there's probably already some complaints like, why are we learning Shakespeare? That's a future lesson. Also, there's probably complaints about, this is hard. Yeah, it's Shakespeare. It's not meant to be easy. It also was not meant to be read. His plays were about the verbal. It was about hearing it. It really wasn't almost about seeing it either. We'll get into that as well. That's probably lesson number 3. So I guess my word of advice here is, with Shakespeare and with anything, you have to learn how to crawl before you can walk. Then you have to learn to walk before you can run. We are in the crawling stage right now. So we're going to take it slow, and we're just going to slowly build up, and eventually we'll have, I would hope, a nice, decent amount of knowledge about Shakespeare. In today's exciting lesson, we're going to be learning about Shakespeare's use of language. How he used stressed and unstressed syllables, how there was poetry versus prose in his writing, how he used iambic pentameter, and we'll go over that one also again in a future lesson. But we're going to touch upon a few things in this lesson that are important to understanding Shakespeare's use of language and all of that as basically as a whole. All right. If you are one of my students, there is either on my Weebly page or attached to Google Classroom a worksheet that needs to be completed, answered, shared with me. The easiest way would be through Google Docs. If you want to email it to me, that will work as well. Okay, without further ado, here is a Shakespeare video on his use of language.
Shakespeare was a master of the English language, but how exactly did he use the language? Well, for that we need to look at some terms. First off, you should know that Shakespeare wrote in both poetry and prose.
Poetry is concentrated language, produced through rhythm and sound. Poetry is a heightened form of language, so it's different from the way people normally talk. Sometimes poetry is called verse. Prose is a lot different. For one thing, it's the language of everyday speech, the ordinary language we would use when speaking or writing.
An example of poetry would be these famous lines from one of Shakespeare's sonnets.
Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate.
And an example of prose is, get some bread and milk when you go to the store.
Let's discuss poetry a bit more, why don't we? Oh, don't worry, we'll get in and out quickly and nobody will get hurt. Our first point. The poetry Shakespeare used is metrical writing, which means, well, it means that poetry uses something called meter.
Meter is the use of a regular rhythmic pattern in language, like in this line from Shakespeare's play Richard III. A horse, my kingdom for a horse. You see, there's a rhythm to the language when you speak it.
The poetry Shakespeare wrote for his plays was in blank verse, a form that usually uses a metrical pattern known as unrhymed iambic pentameter. Though this is a complex term, the concept is fairly straightforward.
First off, unrhymed just means that the words at the end of the line don't rhyme. Now, an iamb is a unit of speech that contains one unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable.
A stressed syllable is one we place emphasis on when we speak, and quite logically, an unstressed syllable is one we don't place emphasis on.
Okay, to help you out, let's go back to that line from Richard III.
A horse, my kingdom for a horse.
Is the first syllable. It's unstressed. Horse is the next syllable, and it's stressed. That's an iamb right there. Notice that these marks signify whether a syllable is stressed or unstressed. The little U mark means the syllable is unstressed, and the plain old straight mark means that the syllable is stressed. Okay, on with the show. The next syllable, unstressed, is followed by horse, which is stressed. It's like déjà vu. This is another iamb. The same holds true for the rest of the line. My king is an iamb, and so is dumb for. Notice that we're not concerned with where words begin or end. This is all about syllables. And then it's back to a horse for our final iamb. Now you can see how this line of poetry gets its rhythm from all these terrific iambs. a horse, my kingdom for a horse.
So the iambic and iambic pentameter just means that the poetry contains iambs. But what about pentameter?
Well, all we have to do is break it down. Penta, that means 5, and meter, that's what we've been talking about. Meter is a regular rhythmic pattern in language. Putting it together, we have 5 meters, or more technically, 5 metrical feet. The meter here is the iamb.
So in a line of iambic pentameter poetry, we have 5 iambs. Our line from Richard III, a horse, my kingdom for a horse, is written in perfect iambic pentameter because it has 5 iambs.
Now you know all about blank verse, which is unrhymed iambic pentameter. Feel free to use your newfound knowledge of iambic pentameter to impress your friends and neighbors.
I really love this rhythmic prose stuff. I think I'm going to speak it all the time. A pen, my kingdom for a pen.
Okay, we should probably address 2 things before we move on. 1, why in the world did Shakespeare write in blank verse anyway? And 2, how important is all this blank verse, iambic pentameter stuff?
Number 1. Why did Shakespeare write in blank verse, also known as unrhymed iambic pentameter? Well, first off, we should say that not every line of Shakespeare is in perfect iambic pentameter. He does mix stuff up. Also, as we said, his plays aren't just written in poetry. Much of the works are written in prose, which, as you remember, is the opposite of poetry.
And the reason why Shakespeare wrote in blank verse is just that he did. It was fairly common practice to write plays in this poetic form during the Elizabethan era.
Playwrights chose this form because the rhythm of the iambs in blank verse most closely resemble the natural rhythms of our speech. Believe it or not, a lot of the time we speak in iambs. Now, we don't go up and down all the time like this, of course, but the underlying rhythm is unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed.
How about our second question? How important is all that blank verse iambic pentameter stuff? Well, you don't have to be a poetry expert to appreciate the rhythm and style of Shakespeare's language. Good blank verse will naturally appeal to and be pleasing to the ear. And Shakespeare, at his best, wrote not just good, but great verse.
Shakespeare's plays are filled with poetry. The poetry is usually blank verse, which is unrhymed iambic pentameter. Iambic means containing iambs. Iambs are units of speech with an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. Pentameter means 5 meters, which in this context means a line of poetry containing 5 iambs.
Well, I hope you learned a lot from that exciting video. I know it was a lot of information. Just take it slow, like I had said earlier. Remember to keep it clean in the comments. If it is inappropriate, I will shut it down. You have now been warned multiple times. Let's see here. You got to hit the like and subscribe button. If you are a student, I highly suggest hitting the notification bell. That will let you know when another video has been posted. Period.